My husband begged me not to sell our house for the sake of the children after his affair. Then I found his 28-year-old girlfriend was living there, redecorating my life away. He thought he had stolen my home for his new family. He forgot my name was still on the deed and he was about to get an eviction notice. Before we begin, I want to thank you for being here, for creating this space with me. If you believe that a woman's home is her sanctuary and that a mother's love should never be used as a weapon against her, then you are in the right place. It means the world to me to see our community gathered here, so please, let me know in the comments where you're listening from. Now let me tell you the story of how my husband tried to use our children to keep our house, and how I made sure that, in the end, the house would belong only to them. My name is Simone Williams. I am 49 years old, and for the past 25 of those years, my life has been built within the walls of a 2-story brick house on a quiet, oak-lined street in Sugar Land, Texas. I am a high school history teacher. I understand patterns. I understand cause and effect. I understand that empires, even small domestic ones, can crumble from the inside out due to moral decay. I just never thought it would happen to mine. The discovery of my husband Michael's affair was not a dramatic, cinematic explosion. It was a quiet, digital betrayal. A series of hotel receipts and intimate text messages on a shared tablet. He had been living a double life for 2 years. A life of business trips to Dallas that were, in fact, romantic getaways with a woman 20 years our junior. When I confronted him, the carefully constructed facade of our perfect suburban life shattered. The initial arguments were a blur of tears, of rage, of 25 years of shared history being thrown back and forth like broken shards of glass. When the dust settled, one thing was clear: our marriage was over. The most contentious issue, the one that became the new battlefield, was the house. To me, it was an archive of my life. It was the wall in the kitchen where I had marked our children's heights, from Jasmine's first wobbly steps to Marcus's sudden lanky growth spurt. It was the garden where I had planted a rose bush for every anniversary. It was the place I had brought my babies home from the hospital. To sell it was a painful but necessary amputation, a way to sever the limb that had become infected with his lies. To Michael, the house was something else entirely. It was his primary status symbol. It was the tangible proof of his success as a sales executive, the backdrop for the life of affluence and stability he projected to the world. Losing it was not just a financial blow, it was a public relations disaster. He came to me one evening after the initial storm had passed, his face arranged in a mask of profound, sorrowful regret. He didn't sit across from me, which would have been confrontational. He sat beside me on the sofa, creating a false sense of intimacy that immediately put me on edge. "Simone," he began, his voice a low, theatrical whisper. "I know I have destroyed your trust in me as a husband. I know I don't deserve your forgiveness. I will live with that shame for the rest of my life." He paused, letting the weight of his performance settle in the room. "But please," he continued, his voice cracking with a perfectly rehearsed emotion, "don't let me fail as a father. Don't punish the kids for my mistakes." He leaned forward, his eyes shining with unshed, manipulative tears. "Jasmine is 17, Simone. She's a senior this year. Her whole life is here. Her friends, her teachers, her memories. You want to rip her out of her school, away from her friends for her final year? Can we do that to her?" He didn't wait for an answer. "And Marcus? He just made the varsity basketball team. His coach thinks he has a real shot at a scholarship. You want to pull him out of that, make him start over at a new school where he knows no one." This was his masterstroke. He knew my love for my children was my greatest strength, and he was now twisting it into my greatest weakness. He was framing my desire for a clean break as a selfish act that would harm our children. "I'm not asking for me," he said, his voice dropping to a near whisper. "I'll sleep in the guest room. I'll sleep on the floor if I have to. I will be a ghost in this house. This isn't about us anymore. It's about the kids. It's about giving them the one thing I can still provide: stability in their home. Please, Simone. For them." I looked at him, at this man I had loved for more than half my life, and I saw the brilliant, charming salesman he was. He was selling me a product, his own continued comfort, packaged as paternal nobility. And despite every rational part of my brain screaming that it was a trap, the history teacher in me was being overruled by the mother. Jasmine's senior year. Marcus's basketball season. These were not small things. These were the momentous final chapters of their childhood. Could I be the one to tear those pages out of their book? torn between my justified white-hot anger and my fierce, all-consuming love for my children. I made a fatal error. I compromised. "All right, Michael," I said, my voice weary, defeated. I will move in with my sister for a while. To give us all some space. To keep things stable for them. But we are selling this house after Jasmine graduates. I am not negotiating on that." A look of profound, triumphant relief washed over his face. He had won. He had secured his castle. "Thank you, Simone," he whispered, taking my hand. "You won't regret this. You're doing the right thing. For the children." I pulled my hand away. I already regretted it. I felt a cold, creeping dread in the pit of my stomach. I had agreed to leave my own home, to retreat from the battlefield in the name of a truce. I had no idea that my retreat was the signal for a new, more insidious occupation to begin. Leaving my home was one of the hardest things I have ever done. I packed a few suitcases, my movements slow and dreamlike, as if I were a ghost haunting my own life. I walked through the rooms, touching the furniture, the photographs, the small, insignificant objects that were the bedrock of my existence. I was leaving behind more than a house. I was leaving behind the woman I had been for 25 years. I moved into the guest room of my sister's house, a small, quiet space that felt both like a sanctuary and a prison. The plan was simple. I would give Michael and the children space. I would maintain a sense of normalcy for them. I would come over for dinners, attend Marcus's basketball games, help Jasmine with her college applications. I would be a mother, just a mother who no longer lived in her own home. For the first few weeks, the arrangement seemed to work. The children were resilient, adapting to the new, strange reality of their separated parents. Michael was the picture of the penitent, noble father he had promised to be. He was respectful on the phone, cooperative with schedules. The waters of our shattered life were beginning to calm. I allowed myself a small, fragile flicker of hope that maybe, just maybe, we could navigate this separation with some semblance of dignity. The first crack in that fragile hope came not from a phone call or a confrontation, but from a casual comment from a friend. I had met my friend Sarah for lunch, and she mentioned she had driven down my street the day before. "I saw the new landscapers at your house," she said, taking a sip of her iced tea. "They're doing a wonderful job with the flower beds. That girlfriend of Michael's certainly has an eye for color." I stared at her, my fork frozen halfway to my mouth. "Girlfriend." I repeated, the word feeling foreign, alien. "What girlfriend?" Sarah's face fell. "Oh, Simone," she said, her eyes full of a sudden, deep pity. "I'm so sorry. I just assumed you knew. This woman, Tiffany. She's been there for a few weeks. I saw her directing them." A cold, sick feeling began to spread through my chest. A woman. In my garden. Directing landscapers. Michael had promised me he would be a ghost in that house. He had not mentioned he would be haunting it with a new partner. When I got back to my sister's house, my hands were shaking. I did something I had never done before. I went online and I searched for Tiffany's name, a name Sarah had reluctantly given me. Her social media profile was public. And it was a horror show. Her profile picture was a selfie of her and Michael, their faces pressed together, smiling into the camera. The background was unmistakable. It was my living room in front of the fireplace that I had so carefully restored. I scrolled through her feed, each picture a fresh, sharp stab to my heart. There she was, hosting a brunch for a group of her young, stylish friends. They were sitting at my dining room table drinking mimosas. From my wedding china. From the baccarat crystal glasses that had been a gift from my late mother. There she was, lounging by the pool in a new bikini, my rose bushes in the background. The caption read, "Loving my new suburban life." There she was, in a picture posted just 2 days ago, standing in my kitchen holding up a bottle of expensive wine. And on the mantelpiece in the living room behind her, where a row of cherished family photos had always stood, pictures of my children as babies, a picture from my own wedding day, there was now a single large piece of generic abstract art. She was not just living in my house. She was systematically, gleefully erasing me from it. She was curating my life out of existence, and she was broadcasting it to the world. And Michael, my husband, the man who had wept and begged me to keep the house for the stability of the children. He was not a ghost. He was the master of ceremonies for this grotesque public spectacle of my replacement. He had not just lied to me. He had orchestrated a campaign of the most profound and intimate disrespect imaginable. The flicker of hope I had nurtured died a swift, violent death. The calm waters of our separation were revealed to be a stagnant, filthy swamp. He had not wanted to keep the house for our children. He had wanted to keep it for her. He had used our children, their well-being, their future, as a shield to hide behind while he installed his mistress on my throne. I sat there in my sister's quiet guest room, the glow of the screen illuminating my face, and I felt a rage so pure, so cold, so absolute, that it burned away all the tears, all the sorrow, all the foolish, lingering hope. The history teacher in me, the woman who understood patterns, finally saw this one with perfect, terrifying clarity. This was not a separation. This was a conquest. And I, the vanquished queen, had been sent into exile so that a usurper could take my place. The war was not over. It had just begun. The knowledge of Tiffany's presence in my home was a poison that seeped into every corner of my life. Sleep became a luxury I could no longer afford. My mind was a relentless reel of images from her social media feed. Her hands tending to my roses, her friends laughing at my dining room table, her reflection in the mirror of my bedroom. The betrayal was so audacious, so brazen, it was almost surreal. Michael had not just moved on. He had moved her directly into the still warm imprint of my life, a parasitic invasion of the most sacred spaces. I tried to maintain a semblance of normalcy for the children, but it was a performance that shredded my soul. When I would go to the house to pick up Marcus for a basketball game, I would have to stand on the porch and wait, a visitor at my own front door. The house smelled different, a cloying mix of Tiffany's expensive perfume and the scented candles she seemed to favor. It was the smell of my own erasure. Michael continued his performance as the noble, heartbroken father, a charade that was now utterly transparent and insulting. He would speak of the children's fragile emotional state, of the importance of not making any sudden moves. He was still using them as human shields, hiding his duplicitous new life behind their well-being. The final unforgivable betrayal, the one that severed the last frayed thread of any lingering sentiment I might have had for the man I had married, came not from Michael but through my son. Marcus called me one Tuesday afternoon. His voice, usually so full of a teenage boy's boisterous energy, was quiet and confused. "Hey Mom," he began, his voice hesitant. "I have a weird question." "What is it, sweetie?" I asked, my heart immediately tensing. Are we redecorating my room?" he asked. "What do you mean?" I said, a cold dread beginning to creep up my spine. "Well," he said, "Dad's friend Tiffany, she was in my room today with paint swatches. She was talking about creating a more mature, masculine space for me. She said it was important to clear out some of your old energy, Mom." Clear out some of my old energy. The words were a physical blow. She was not just erasing me from the public spaces of the house. She was now invading the private sanctuaries of my children, trying to scrub my very essence, my motherhood, from their lives. "And," Marcus continued, his voice dropping even lower, "she and Dad were talking about my birthday. They want to get me that new gaming system. The really expensive one." "That's nice of them," I said, my voice tight. "Yeah," he said. "But Dad said that to afford it he was going to have to move some money around, because you've been a little irresponsible with the joint credit card lately." I felt the air leave my lungs. The joint credit card. The one we had kept active for emergencies, and for the children's expenses. I hadn't touched it in months. After I hung up with Marcus, my hands were shaking so badly I could barely operate my laptop. I logged into our joint bank account, and there was a credit card statement that was a testament to Michael's breathtaking audacity. He had maxed it out. Thousands of dollars in charges from the past 2 weeks. There were charges from high-end boutiques in the Galleria. There were charges from expensive restaurants in Dallas. There were charges for a luxury spa weekend. He had been funding his new life with his girlfriend, and he was planning on framing me for it. He was not just replacing me, he was trying to financially ruin me and turn my own son against me in the process. That was it. That was the moment the history teacher, the patient, compromising mother, the heartbroken wife, died. In her place, a new woman was born. A woman of cold, clear, and absolute resolve. The goal was no longer to survive this separation with my dignity intact. The goal was no longer to make a clean break. The goal was to win. He had used our children as his shield. He had used our home as his playground. He had used our shared finances as his personal slush fund. He had underestimated me at every turn, believing my love for my children would make me a permanent, willing victim. He was wrong. My love for my children was not a weakness. It was my greatest strength. And I was about to use that strength to build a fortress around them, a fortress that would protect them from their own father's greed and deceit. And that fortress would be built on the scorched earth of the life we had once shared. I was done grieving. I was done being the victim. It was time to go to war. The rage that had been building inside me for weeks did not explode. It coalesced. It hardened from a hot, chaotic emotion into a cold, dense, and perfectly clear purpose. I was a history teacher. I understood strategy. I knew that the most successful campaigns are not won with loud frontal assaults, but with quiet, meticulous planning and the exploitation of an enemy's weaknesses. Michael's greatest weakness was his arrogance. He was so convinced of his own cleverness, so sure of my emotional fragility, that he would never see the counterattack coming. My first move was not to call him and scream, which is what he would have expected. My first move was to call a woman whose name I had been given by a friend. She was a divorce attorney, a legend in the Houston legal community, a woman known for being as sharp as a shard of glass and as ruthless as a shark. Her name was Diane Summers. I met her in her sleek, downtown office. I sat across from her polished mahogany desk, and for 1 solid hour, I laid out the entire sordid story. I told her about the affair, the gaslighting, the manipulative for the children plea. I told her about Tiffany, the social media posts, the erasure of my life from my own home. I told her about the conversation with my son, the attempt to turn him against me. And I showed her the maxed-out credit card statement. Diane Summers listened, her face impassive, her fingers steepled under her chin. She did not offer sympathy. She offered something far better, a plan. "He's a classic high-level narcissist, Mrs. Williams," she said when I had finished, her voice calm and analytical. "Textbook. He uses emotional manipulation as a primary tool and believes he is untouchable. These men always make the same mistake. They underestimate the woman they have scorned." "He's going to try to keep the house," I said. "He'll fight me tooth and nail." "Of course he will," she said with a thin, cold smile. "It's his trophy. But he's not going to win. We are going to let him think he's winning, right up until the moment we take it all away." Her confidence was a tonic to my frayed nerves. For the first time in months, I felt like I was not alone, that I had a powerful ally in my corner. Following her precise instructions, I began my quiet campaign. I did not confront Michael about the credit card. I did not mention Tiffany. I continued to play the part of the wounded, emotionally fragile wife. I documented everything. Every manipulative text message he sent. Every social media post Tiffany made from inside my house. I took screenshots. I saved emails. I built a mountain of evidence, a digital archive of their disrespect. During one of our conversations, I brought up my greatest fear, the fear that Michael would squander any money from the sale of the house, leaving nothing for the children's future, for their college education. "He's reckless with money, Diane," I said. "He'll burn through it in a year on her." "I know," she said. "And that's why we're going to make sure he never touches your half." She then introduced me to the perfect legal instrument, the ultimate weapon in my new arsenal, an irrevocable trust. She explained it to me in simple terms. We would create a legal trust, the Williams Children's Educational Trust. Once the house was sold, my entire half of the proceeds would be deposited directly into that trust. The money would be legally, untouchably the children's. It could only be used for their education and well-being, managed by a neutral third-party trustee. I could not touch it. And more importantly, Michael could not touch it. He would have no legal claim to it, no way to access it, no way to squander it on his new life. The beauty of it was its purity. It was not a vengeful act. It was an act of profound maternal protection. I was taking my share of our family's primary asset and dedicating it in its entirety to the very children he had used as pawns. I was calling his bluff. He had claimed this was all for the children. I was about to make that a legal, binding reality. The plan was formed. It was a 3-step process. First, we needed final, irrefutable proof that Tiffany was living in the house, not just visiting. Second, we would list and sell the house as quickly as possible. Third, we would serve him with the final divorce papers, the news of the sale, and the establishment of the trust, all at the same time. A legal trifecta from which he could not recover. My quiet strategy was in motion. I was no longer just a history teacher. I was a historian of my own life, meticulously documenting the crimes of the past in order to secure the future. Michael thought he was playing a game of emotional chess with a novice. He had no idea I was about to flip the board over and rewrite the rules of the game entirely. The final piece of evidence we needed was the most painful to acquire. Diane's strategy required undeniable proof that Tiffany was not just a guest, but a resident in my home. A photograph taken by a professional that would be admissible in court. It was the legal nail in the coffin of Michael's noble father narrative. Under the guise of a final desperate attempt at reconciliation, I called Michael. My voice, coached by Diane, was a perfect blend of weariness and fragile hope. Michael, I said, I think we need to talk. In person. At the house. For the kids' sake, we need to decide what we're really going to do. He agreed immediately, his voice full of a smug, condescending pity. He thought I was crawling back. He thought I was broken and ready to accept his new reality. He told me to come by the following Saturday afternoon. The kids will be out with friends, he said. We can talk privately. He was, as always, creating the perfect stage for his own performance. That Saturday I drove to my own house, my heart a cold, hard knot in my chest. As I pulled onto my street, I saw a nondescript van parked a few houses down. Inside, I knew, was the private investigator Diane had hired, a man with a long-lens camera. This was not a reconciliation. This was a reconnaissance mission. I walked up the path to my front door and rang the bell. Michael opened it, his face arranged in a mask of solemn concern. Simone, he said, his voice low. I'm glad you came. I stepped inside and the assault on my senses was immediate. The house smelled of her perfume, a sweet, cloying scent that had replaced the familiar smell of my own home. The air was thick with her presence. I walked through the rooms, my movements slow, my eyes taking in every detail of my own erasure. The family photos on the mantelpiece were gone, replaced by a single large framed photo of a sunset. My reading nook, the cozy corner of the living room where I would curl up with a book, had been transformed. My comfortable armchair was gone, replaced by a sleek, uncomfortable-looking yoga mat and a set of weights. The most brutal blow was my home office. It had been my sanctuary, a room filled with my history books, my research, the framed pictures my students had drawn for me over the years. It had been painted a deep, calming blue. Now the walls were a stark, sterile white. My books were gone, replaced by shelves of shoes, her shoes. My desk was gone, replaced by a large Hollywood-style vanity table covered in makeup. She had not just taken my husband, she had taken my space, my identity, my very thoughts. Michael followed me, providing a running commentary of justifications. Tiffany thought the blue was a little depressing, Simone. We wanted to brighten the place up for the kids. She needed a place to get ready. You were never using this office anyway. I didn't argue. I didn't cry. I just nodded, my face a blank mask, allowing him to believe his lies were working. I was giving the investigator time. Time to get the shots. A shot of Tiffany coming out the front door to get the mail. A shot of her car parked in my spot in the driveway. The final, undeniable proof. After 20 minutes of this quiet torture, I knew we had what we needed. I stood in the middle of my desecrated living room. You're right, Michael, I said, my voice hollow. There's nothing left to talk about. I turned and walked out of the house without another word. I did not look back. As I drove away, I saw the investigator's van pull away from the curb behind me. The mission was accomplished. That afternoon, my hands steady, my heart cold and clear, I met with the real estate agent Diane had recommended. I signed the listing agreement. The house, my house, the archive of my life, was officially for sale. A for sale sign was hammered into my front lawn the next morning. Michael's frantic, furious phone call came an hour later. What the hell is this, Simone? He roared. You went behind my back. I thought we were trying to work things out. There is nothing left to work out, Michael, I said, my voice as calm and as steady as a frozen lake. You made your choice. You chose her. You chose this. Now you have to live with the consequences. The house, being in a prime location in a desirable school district, was a hot commodity. It sold in less than a week for over the asking price, in a cash deal that allowed for a quick closing. While the sale was being finalized, Diane's office was a whirlwind of activity. The divorce papers were drawn up. The irrevocable trust was legally established. Everything was in place. Michael thought he still had time to fight, to maneuver, to manipulate. He had no idea that the game was already over. He was a king in a castle that had already been sold, commanding an army that had already deserted him. The point of no return had been passed, and the only thing left was the final, devastating checkmate. The closing on the house was a quiet, sterile affair conducted in a lawyer's office. I signed the final papers, my signature a neat, decisive stroke. The proceeds of the sale were wired, and my half, a life-changing sum of money, the culmination of 25 years of shared investment and sacrifice, was immediately, electronically, transferred into the newly established ironclad Williams Children's Educational Trust. It was done. The money was safe. It was theirs. And it was forever out of his reach. The final act was the delivery. Diane did not want to give Michael any warning, any time to hide assets or concoct new lies. A process server was dispatched that same afternoon. He found Michael not at home but at his office in the middle of a sales meeting. The server walked into the glass-walled conference room and served him the papers in front of his entire team. The public humiliation was a small, petty, but deeply satisfying bonus. I imagine him sitting in his office after the meeting, the thick legal envelope in his hands. He would have opened it with a smirk. Assuming it was just the first move in a long drawn-out negotiation he was confident he could win. He would have read the final, uncontestable divorce decree first. Then he would have gotten to the asset distribution section. He would have seen the final sale price of the house, his eyes likely widening at the number. He would have seen his half, a substantial sum. But then he would have seen the section detailing my half. He would have read about the establishment of the irrevocable trust. He would have seen the clause stating that 100% of my proceeds had been legally and permanently placed in an account for the sole benefit of Jasmine and Marcus, an account they could not access until they were 25, an account managed by a neutral, court-appointed trustee. He would have realized in a wave of sickening, impotent rage that he had been completely and utterly outmaneuvered. He had been so focused on trying to steal my half that he had never imagined I would simply give it away to the very children he had used as pawns. He was denied the satisfaction. He was denied the prize. But the final, most devastating document would have been at the very back of the packet. It was not from my lawyer, but from the lawyer representing the new owners of the house. It was a cold, formal, and legally binding letter. A notice, giving him, Michael Williams, and his unnamed guest, 30 days to vacate the property. He was not just divorced. He was not just outsmarted. He was homeless. His phone calls started that evening. They were a symphony of narcissistic rage. He screamed. He threatened. He accused me of being a vindictive, evil woman. He told me I had destroyed the children's lives by selling their home. I listened to his tirade in silence. When he finally ran out of breath, I spoke, my voice calm and clear. "You were right about one thing, Michael," I said. "This was always about the children. And now their future is secure. Their college is paid for. They will have a down payment for their own homes one day. I have given them the stability that you were only pretending to care about." "But what about me?" he wailed, his voice finally breaking, the rage replaced by a pathetic, self-pitying despair. "What about Tiffany? Where are we supposed to go?" "I believe," I said, the words tasting like a victory I had never known I was capable of, "that is no longer my concern." I hung up the phone. The aftermath was a quiet, satisfying unraveling of the life he had built on lies. He and Tiffany were forced to move into a small, generic rental apartment, the kind of place they had always looked down upon. The public projection of his success was shattered. Their relationship, built on the thrill of an affair and the promise of my house, could not survive the harsh reality of their new, downsized life. They broke up within 6 months. My children were hurt and confused at first, but as the truth of their father's actions came to light, they understood. They saw that my decision was not an act of revenge, but an act of ultimate protection. Our relationship, once strained by their father's manipulation, was now stronger than ever. I used a small portion of my own savings to get a new place, a bright, airy townhouse with a small garden, a place that was all mine. It is not a large, impressive house like the one in Sugar Land, but it is a home built not on lies, but on a foundation of resilience and a mother's unbreakable love. The past is a history lesson I have learned well. But the future is a story I am finally free to write myself.